What's up everybody, Jamison Redding here with the Road Trip Angler. And in this video, I wanted to touch on how we found success and what baits and tactics we used to catch snook when we were down in the Everglades fishing with Chris Funk. Snook are so cool to me. Their eyes are located kind of on the top of their head, so they're really able to feed up in the water column, and they're constantly looking up, which makes them perfect for chasing topwater baits. And having one explode on a topwater bait is just something that I can't describe. Fish. You really have to experience it for yourself. While we were down there, we experienced some tough conditions, and it took us a while to actually find the fish. We had to cover a lot of water and do it quickly in order to locate some fish. And before I get into what baits and what setup I had that I was able to find success with, I want to talk about how we actually located those fish. We were in pretty fresh water and pretty far back up in the Everglades. Now, in the wintertime, the flats that we were covering are very dark bottom flats, and they heat up really well because they're shallow, they have a dark bottom, and when the sun beats down on them, they warm up. So in colder conditions, the snook tend to move up onto those flats in order to stay warm throughout the winter. However, it had not gotten that cold in December when we were down there yet. So the fish just had not moved to the area that we wanted to fish, and we didn't have anybody pre-fishing for us to tell us, hey, they're not back there yet, or there's no fish in that area. So we put in there and we started working our way closer and closer to the bigger open water where the snook would be maybe transitioning from being out front and on the beaches, coming into those shallow flats for the winter. One of the telltale signs that you are around fish is when you see things happening in nature around you. And in this case, it was birds actually working the shoreline. As we moved further away though, we found birds actively working the shoreline, and we also saw bait moving around and even saw some fish blowing up on bait along the shoreline. One of the other factors that really played a big part in this trip was the tide. The fish would move way back into the mangroves when the tide was up, of course, to feed back in there. But when the tide came down, it forced the fish to come out of the mangroves, and they were working those edges, which is also when we saw a lot of the birds working. And they had this symbiotic relationship where the fish was pushing the bait towards the shore, and the birds were then attacking the bait as it got close to the shoreline or to the edge of those mangroves. So they were a dead giveaway that there were probably hungry snook right in front of them every single time.
Oh my God.
Now I want to jump into what I actually used to catch the fish that I caught. Chris and I had a little bit of difference in our tactics, but I really, again, wanted to see topwater blowups, and I wanted to cover a lot of water and be able to make casts quickly and see if something happened. I also wanted to be able to skip that bait into those cuts in the mangroves to get it as far back as possible, especially when the water began to come up. So to start with, I chose the Z-Man Billy Goat in Pearl. I really like fishing white baits for snook. I don't know why, they seem to really key in on it well, but white for me has always done well when I've snook fished, what little bit of snook fishing that I have done. And the Billy Goats is just a really cool bait that can skip really easily, but also be rigged weedless so that it can kind of come through those edges of the mangroves, and if you do happen to go across one of the limbs, most of the time you can get it off that limb or out of those mangroves without getting it caught. The Billy Goats, you kind of split the tail apart. It's a thicker body bait in the middle here, and it kind of torpedoes back to these two little legs. And what's really cool about these legs is they also have a little paddle tail on the end of both of them. So as you're reeling it through the water, they just kick back and forth and give you some really nice action and disturbance on the water. It's a bait that you can pause, you can kind of jerk to get bigger splashes, or you can continuously reel and pause it every so often, or literally just cast it out and reel it back in. Again, it skips really easy, and it gives you that nice disturbance, and it's an easy bait to follow with your eyes, because sometimes when you least expect it is when that fish is going to attack the bait, and being able to keep contact or see that bait get attacked, you know to wait a few seconds, or at least one whole second before you set that hook to make sure the fish is taking it down. Now I rigged that on a Mustad grip pin. There's a KVD grip pin. This is a 4/0 hook, and that combination was perfect. It gave me enough hook that when they bit down on the plastic, it cleared it, and I was able to get a good hookup rating.
Oh my gosh.
So that's pretty simple on the setup for the bait and hook, but I want to get into the line and the rod and reel setup as well. And you'll see I've got an assortment of Seaguar lines laid out here, going from a 20-pound inshore setup and then into their Gold Label product all the way up to 50 pounds. Now the interesting thing about Snook is even the smaller ones have super sharp gill plates, and those gill plates will literally cut your line like a knife. So you want to be able to rig as light as you can, but still catch those fish, and sometimes that's a little bit of a gamble. Going down to 20 pound, while it is strong enough to catch pretty much any of those fish, no matter how big those snook get, it will cut almost as quick as they hit it. If they turn and that line gets in that gill plate, it's going to just slice it right up. The other thing is you're fishing around cover like the mangroves, or you might be fishing around pylons and whatnot, and those things tend to grow barnacles on them, and those are also very sharp. So I would start out with no less than 25 pound test, and actually I found myself primarily using 30 pound test Gold Label Seaguar fluorocarbon leader. I like the Gold Label because it is very clear, but it's also very supple, so it tends to bend a little more. It's not quite as stiff as some of the others, and it has a very small diameter, so I can go up in the strength, but the diameter of it doesn't really increase as much as it would in some of the other fluorocarbons that are on the market. So I was using the Gold Label. The Inshore works great as well. It actually has a little more abrasion resistant than, or actually is a little more abrasion resistant than the Gold Label, but I just happen to have an assortment of sizes in the Gold Label on this trip, but you could definitely use the 30 pound Inshore. Now, if you're fishing around some pretty big snook, or if you're having issues, don't be afraid to go up to that 50 pound mark. I am not noticing enough weight there to sink or pull that bait down, and there's so much, the plastic is so buoyant that it's going to float that even at 50 pounds, and you're working this lure pretty fast. So if you need to go up, go up. If you're losing fish, go up. I made the 30 pound work and only had one really major heartbreak. He cut me off on my motor.
No.
Maybe two on this trip.
Oh my gosh. Oh, he cut me off.
So definitely use at least 30 pound test fluorocarbon leader. Now for the main line, I was using 30 pound test Seaguar Smackdown in the high vis. I like the high vis, especially if I'm going to be using that top shot of fluorocarbon leader anyway, because I can see the line. I can see the bait, it's white, I can see the line if I'm working it, and it just allows me to really keep a good visual of what everything is doing. And that 30 pound test Seaguar is plenty strong enough for these fish, especially if you're going to have that tippet on to protect you against those break-offs. I also like the braid because in a kayak, when you set the hook, you tend to pull the kayak towards the fish, and you're going to lose a little bit of that hook set power because of that. That braid is going to gain that back, versus if you were using monofilament line that has a stretch to it, you're going to lose a little bit too much of that hook set power. So that braid allows me to stay connected to that fish and really set the hook. Plus it increases sensitivity, which isn't as big a deal when I'm fishing topwater, but there you go. For my rod setup, I went with the Rain Shadow Eternity. It's an RX10 blank, medium heavy, fast action in a spinning rod setup. So instead of a bait caster this time, I went with a spinning reel, spinning rod setup. And that's because I am not that good at skipping with a bait caster, especially when it's lightweight lures. So this was rigged completely weightless and weedless. So we're talking about a soft plastic and a hook. It's very lightweight, but I wanted to have more power, a little bit stiffer rod, a little bit more power in the rod, to be able to pull those fish out of those mangroves. And I can't skip a bait caster that well. I can, however, skip a spinning reel, and so that is what I went with on this. Now this is a 7'2" blank or rod, and I like that for topwater baits because I'm connected to that fish very quickly. The rod's gonna load very quickly, and I just feel like when I'm fishing literally just a hook and a soft plastic, a fast action rod works a little better. Now if I was fishing something with treble hooks, I would definitely go with a more moderate action on there. But this was a great setup. It had plenty of power. It's a very strong, lightweight, and sensitive rod, and I'm able to skip it. For the reel, I had this is a Stratic CI4. This is an older reel that I have from Shimano in the 3000 series, but it has plenty of drag. and I was able to fight those fish, no problem, and get them to the boat. Hopefully that helps you key in on some of those snook when you're fishing down in the Everglades around those mangroves. Topwater is a lot of fun. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, and as always, thanks for watching.